M4, 16-inch. But what about ye old tactical M16? What about the 20-inch? What about a full-size rifle instead of a carbine? Is there still a place for a 20-inch barreled 5.56 in the modern gunfighting world? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Saddle up to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host today. There should be a link of the bio in the show notes for some bona fides. But I have quite a bit of experience with this platform we're going to talk about today, the 20-inch AR-15 variants. So this came to me. I didn't get permission to use a person's name, so I'm not going to. But he wrote me a fairly lengthy email. I'd like to check emails and see what's going on with the podcast, feedback, things like that, especially on Patreon. And he wrote me and asked, in a nutshell, is there still a place in the modern world for a 20-inch 5.56? We'll get into that today. Let me start off with, you might not know unless you know timelines and stuff in the bio, the cliff notes. I went to war with a 20-inch twice. I went to war with an M16A2, just beat up, ragged, iron sights, honestly, pretty crap gun, if I'm being honest. Gave me a catastrophic malfunction during the war, meaning like something that had to be fixed with tools, like not something you could fix in the field, like broken. Looked like it had been drugged behind a truck for a couple of miles, beat up, maybe, I don't know how much percentage of it was black versus, polished aluminum at that point because it had been used so much. That's what I went to war with during the invasion of Iraq. Got a much newer M16A4 for my second deployment. After the invasion, after things kind of collapsed and we were still there as whatever we were doing. For the second deployment, I had an M16A4 with an ACOG. Still, that was before they let us qual with the ACOG. We shot it and zeroed with it, but we qualled with the iron sights and then put the ACOG on and then zeroed it and then carried both. So I have quite a bit of experience with the 20-inch barreled ARs, or M16, the actual M16. Now the variants you're going to get are going to be not full auto or not 3-round burst, and 3-round burst is garbage, and full auto is mostly useless. I know you think it's cool, but if you've shot a bunch of full auto, it quickly wears off its coolness factor. If you want to be effective, put it in semi. There are very, very few and far between situations where, putting it on full auto is useful. So I have a bit of experience with the platform. The 20-inch barreled 5.56. Now, I think a lot of people gravitate or they look at this because of the velocity, and you do get some velocity gain for sure going from a 16-inch to a 20-inch, but not as much as you would think, right? It's not linear, right? It is for a while. When you start chopping off barrels, it drops off gradually and then suddenly. Whatever that arc is, right? It can be slow and then drop off steadily, kind of like trajectory. You lose, a few feet per second going, when you start dropping off, 20 to 18 to 16. But then when you start getting below like 16, 14, you start dropping off dramatically. When you start getting below like 11, it's even more drastic. So you do lose a bit of velocity going from a 20-inch to a 16-inch. And that is something to consider. Whether that velocity means much to you. 29.83 and 29.43. That's the velocity listed on ballistics by the inch, dropping from an 18 to a 16 inch. So in those 2 inches. Is it less? It is less when you chop, a couple inches off. Is it a lot less? No. And I would have quoted the 20 inch, but they didn't list it on there. But if memory serves correct, it's a little over 3,000 feet a second. with a 55 grain. And if memory serves correct, this is just off the cuff here, but the number, and this is not, you should verify these numbers. These are numbers in my head. I believe like 3060, so 3,060 feet a second is like the number for the old XM 193 55 grain out of a 20-inch barrel. So you're talking just over 3,000 feet a second, and you're talking in the mid 29s for a 16-inch barrel 55 grain. Is it different? Yeah, it's a difference. But if you look at that, let's say 100 feet a second for rough numbers, 3,000 divided by 100, the percentage point is small. It's there. It is there. I'm not going to say it's not there and it's not important, but it is a small difference. And again, you start getting crazy short, you do shed velocity like water off a duck's back. But at those, and I think that's one of the reasons the 16 inches become so popular, because you're carrying around 4 inches less of barrel, but you're not giving up a ton in velocity. And that's really one of the big reasons why the M4, I think, has taken hold. Now, again, there is more velocity. We'll get back to that later when we talk about ammo. Another big advantage is the sight radius. If you are driving iron sights, if you're rocking iron sights and no optic at all, yeah, that sight radius, it's better. It is better. As somebody that, again, qualified, I don't know if I said this earlier, but qualified expert in the Marine Corps with those rifles, just shooting iron sights out to 500 meters, and that's, I don't know if that's as much the 16-inch versus the 20-inch or the Marines versus the Army. The Army goes out to 300. The Marines go out to 500. That said, that longer sight radius on the 20-inch barrel is better. Just period. It's better for iron sights. You get a longer sight radius, it's more accurate. You can be more accurate with it. If you want to be faster, you flip up the O2 sight. But if you want precision, that longer sight radius is better. That's kind of a brief tangent here. Kind of one of the reasons people still think it's kind of some of the old lure or some of the old myth that a longer barrel gun is more accurate. A longer barrel gun is not more accurate. Not at all. It has nothing to do with it. So, if you put an optic on it, it makes no difference, the barrel length and the accuracy. But if you're shooting iron sights, you have to align the front and the rear sight. The farther those are apart, the more you will notice minor imperfections in the sight picture, which means you should be able to shoot it more accurately. That's how that works. It's kind of like a long level versus a short level. If you're measuring something that doesn't really make any difference, like a picture frame, a little short bubble level is fine. It's relatively level. If you're measuring the foundation of a house or a brick wall, you want a really long level because it's longer, it's more precise. If you move it a little bit, you're going to notice it more. Same with a long sight radius. So yeah, if you're going to rock iron sights and iron sights alone, for sure, you are going to see an advantage in those rifle length sights versus carbine sights. You have a longer sight radius. And you're talking to a man that loves to shoot with iron sights. I really have an affinity for iron sights. I've been competition shooting since I was a boy. Won my first gold medal before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. Or maybe I was 18 waiting to ship out. With iron sights, shooting rifles with iron sights. I love iron sights. I really, really do. I think there's still a place for good iron sights. If you are only going to rock iron sights, that is a big advantage. That said, optics are absolutely a force multiplier. I was just frustratingly trying to mount an optic on my 2011, had it cut, and just one thing after another with that thing. First I got it and I sent it off to have it cut because it's an older STI before they were doing the cuts. And it's just been sitting there, and it's like, I want to shoot this gun, and I'm just not going to carry it without an optic. It's because it's less effective. So I sent it off. In the first place I sent it to went out of business. So they had it for months and months, didn't get cut. I took it to another place. They cut it a little bit imprecisely. I've spent like $300 on a kit for all the things from Trijicon to get it mounted, and the front sight didn't fit. So I had to order another front sight, and that came in. And then I had the front sight that I ordered from Dawson, that didn't fit, so I had to file it down to fit and beat it in there with a hammer, which was not fun. And then I go to mount it today, and the Trijicon RMR didn't fit because they cut it slightly and precisely. So I took out my hand file and filed it down. And I went to mount it. It's like, finally, it'll fit. And the screws were too long. They bottomed out. So they don't fit. So I still don't have it mounted. Why would I go through all that frustration and cut a really expensive gun like that? Why would I do all that? Why did I go on that little diatribe there? Because optics are a force multiplier. As much as I love iron sights, optics are a force multiplier. I still think you should have backup iron sights because glass breaks, batteries die, things like that. But optics are absolutely a force multiplier. And to deny that they are is kind of, it's denial. So, get off that river and embrace optics. If you're shooting an optic, the sight radius really doesn't make any difference. If they're backup iron sights, if you're using backup iron sights, you're probably in a pinch anyway, and probably speed is more of a factor than your precision. You're still going to want good, well-aimed shots, but the difference between the sight radius of a carbine and a rifle may just be academic at that point. So, again, going back to the longer rifles are more accurate. They're not. And if you mount an optic on it, you put a scope on it, it's not. One rifle may be more accurate than another, but inherently a longer barrel is not more accurate than a shorter barrel. That's an old myth. So if you're putting an optic on it, then you're back to what are you really gaining? 100 feet a second of velocity? Maybe that's really important to you. The thing I want to talk about is if you're shooting that XM193 55 grain full metal jacket, velocity can be really important because one of the reasons that ammo was effective was because it tends to yaw and tumble and fragment. That takes velocity. I know they say about the twist rates and stuff, but that is moving fast enough that it'll often fragment, I think, even if it is stable, it's going so fast that it will fragment in soft targets because of the velocity. So the more velocity in the longer barrel can help that if you're shooting full metal jackets, or even if you're shooting, I would say the abysmal performing 62 grain green tip, the M855. That stuff's abysmal. I'll take every advantage I can get. But hopefully in today's world, unless you're, handcuffed by the Hague Convention, you're not rocking that ammo, that archaic ammo. Hopefully you're shooting soft pointed ammo or a hollow point ammo or something in a carbine designed to do well. Those should do well at far lower velocities than you need to fragment a full metal jacket. So that velocity may not have been the major difference that it would have been if you were shooting full metal jackets. Again, more is more, but is that, out of we're talking around 3,000 feet a second, is that 100 feet a second make much of a difference? And is it worth carrying that extra 4 inches and that extra maneuverability of the 4 inches less? Is it worth it? The vast majority, I think, would say no. That's why the 16 inch is the standard. But I want to talk about one more thing. And I think this is often overlooked. And that is the M16, as Stoner designed it, the AR as Stoner designed it, was a 20-inch gun. That gas system was designed for a 20-inch gun. It operates better with a full-length rifle-sized gas system. I'm going to go out and say, period. It does. One of the things that I don't like about the AR platform is its direct impingement. I don't like direct impingement. It has foibles and quirks, and you only exacerbate those when you go to a 16-inch, especially a carbine length. If I go to a 16-inch, I like to go with a mid-length gas system. The carbine length, it works, but it does not have the longevity of a rifle-length gas system. It's harder on the system. You have to, for instance, drill a gas port in the barrel. That's how that works. You have a gas port, and you have that long gas tube that funnels that gas back to the bolt so it can go to the bathroom where it eats and cycle that system. One of the things I don't like about it. But that hole, as you may be aware, if you're talking about internal ballistics, when that pressure spikes in that round, it spikes super high and that gas is super hot, but only for literal microseconds. The farther you get down the barrel, the much cooler that gas becomes. A lot cooler. And because the rifle length gas tube is longer, by the time it goes through that system, it is a lot cooler and a lot, let's say, abusive on the system. So just the mere fact that you have that gas port out at the end of the barrel further out at the end of the barrel. It's further away from that initial explosion and crazy high pressures and heat, means that system operates, for lack of a better term, more elegantly and more gently the way it was designed. You can make it work fine with a carbine length system, but you're going to give the system more abuse, and you are going to, I would say, almost certainly erode that gas port more quickly. Because I don't know if you know this, but every time you fire a rifle, you diminish its life. It has a certain set life, and every time you fire it, you're eating that away. I don't care how good a rifle it is. If you shoot it enough, you will destroy it. Every round is one less round you can shoot through that gun. But you can shoot a lot more out of a rifle-length system than a carbine system, and that's just a reality. One of the reasons being that direct impingement system is not the most robust anyway, and that gas port means that you're venting hot gases through that gas port, and that erodes the gas port, like literally eats it away every time you shoot it. So you're going to do that less with a rifle, and that's one of the things I think people don't realize, that it's not just a shorter rifle. You're operating in different parameters, different pressures, and it was initially designed with that 20-inch barrel. That said, we've had a lot of work done with the carbine length system. It does work. It does not have the longevity of the rifle. It's going to be a little bit more violent as far as beating itself up. Consider it like what do they call that? Somebody that abuses themselves, a sadist. So it's more of a sadistic, masochistic kind of system, whereas the rifle is a more elegant, refined kind of gas system, if you want to think of it that way, if that helps. Now, there is a thing for this. It's there is like the dissipator system, which gives you like a shorter barrel with a full-length rifle system. But that has its own kind of quirks as you're kind of going off the rails of what's proven. But that system does exist, called the dissipator. And there's also the mid-length, which is kind of a compromise. I don't mind the mid-length, actually. But I think that's a major thing that people don't consider at all. I've said this before. If you're only going to... I think every red-blooded American should have a AR-15 variant, a good one of some sort. I was out training with mine last night. I think for the vast majority of people, the 16-inch is the better way to go. We live in an increasingly, crowded environment. Even me, I'm in wide open spaces right now. About as wide open as you can get. I live on purpose on the Wild West. Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, like that area. And I love it, and I live here on purpose. Most people live in a much more crowded environment. And the 16-inch barrel is a little bit handier, and you're not giving up a lot. I think that's why it has become the standard. It's a standard for me, too. That said, if you wanted the full-length rifle, I wouldn't fault you for it. I have thought several times about getting an old Colt. They make basically a clone in semi-auto of a Colt M16A4. I've thought about getting one. But I would be getting one mostly for nostalgia, because I ran one during the war, and I would take it out and I would shoot, set out targets out maybe to 500 yards and shoot with iron sights with a hasty sling or with a loop sling, just for funsies, just for nostalgia's sake. I might do that, and I've thought about doing that, and I've had a full-length rifle in the past with one of the older Olympic arms, and I did it just for fun, shooting small targets with iron sights. But it's mostly for nostalgia, if I'm being honest, and I do love that, but if I want to shoot really good and practice with iron sights, it's a lot more affordable to do it with a 22. And I like to have backup iron sights on my fighting rifles, but again, they're backup iron sights. So if you want to go 20-inch, there are advantages. That's why I kind of wanted to suss that out here and talk with you guys about that here. There are advantages. They're not just the same. You're not just getting rid of 4 inches of barrel. There are differences. There are some pretty profound differences. Again, I think for most people, if you're going to have a go-to AR, have a good 16-inch carbine. It is the de facto standard, unless you have a serious reason to go away from that standard. Again, if you just want one, or it's what you're comfortable with because it's what you had during the war or when you served, I'm not going to fault you for that. Go for it. You are going to add a little bit of weight and a little bit of bulk. There is a technique. I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. There are techniques where if you need to make that rifle shorter, even with a fixed stock, you just short stock it. There are techniques where you can bring the gun back over your shoulder. There are even techniques where you can pull the trigger with your thumb. They're not great techniques. They work, though. If you're in the kind of environment like you're clearing a small room or a bathroom with a full-length rifle, and you don't need a super short gun to clear rooms. Look at how much urban warfare was done in World War II. Look at the barrel length in World War II. There was a ton of urban warfare done in World War II. Look at Marines. Marines, a standard 20-inch barrel rifle. They fought the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, myself included, in very urban environments at times with 20-inch barrels. And they're some of the best door kickers on the planet. So don't think that you can't do it. There are techniques that you can to just, kind of negate some of the length of that rifle, and they work. Are they crazy accurate? No, but if you're clearing a bathroom, getting back to that scenario, you kind of just need to put metal on meat and pull the trigger into something that's soft and not you, right? So the length is not as big a deal as you might think when you're doing urban warfare stuff, is what I think a lot of people think of. But when you're carrying that sucker all day, when you're maybe stuck as the guy on perimeter duty for 12 hours holding that rifle, or you're on patrol for 20 miles and your feet are bloody, yeah, every little bit helps. Ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. And for me, I would forego the extra length of the rifle most of the time. Just some thoughts on the wrap up there. I don't think it should be your go-to unless you have a specific reason for it. And again, if you just want it, it's not ineffective. It's got some advantages. So if you just want a 20-inch, yeah, rock on with it. And that seems like a good place to wrap it up. Either way, 16-inch, 20-inch, you want to go with a 12.5, you want to go with a 14-pin. Here's the thing. Get it. Get some legit training, like fighting rifle training, and be good with it. Be well regulated. And with that, I'm going to close out with the verse of the day from the mouth of Jesus, in the Gospels. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.